Militarily speaking, the Iranians are stronger today than they were before the war. And their missiles are larger in number. Their advanced missiles have increased. And they're even now, they're getting rid of the older missiles uh, in these exchanges. If you've noticed, some of the older missiles are still being fired off so that they can empty their underground missile bases of the older missiles and focus on the newer missiles that are being rapidly produced. And the same is true with the drones. So Iran's missile and drone capabilities are greater today than before. And Iran is working on precision, even greater precision than before. They're working on other elements to make on other fields to make sure their missiles get through any defense shields. They're working on their drone capabilities. They're moving and advancing technologically, as well as both qualitatively and quantitatively. And all of Iran's underground bases are now ready for war. And Iran has increased the number of decoys again because the Americans and the Israeli regime bombed literally thousands of decoys. And I don't know how many thousands, two, 3,000, but huge numbers. And they've wasted billions of dollars on hitting these cheap decoys, which are very good. I mean, the Chinese made decoys are very good. Some of the decoys are Iranian, but the Chinese made decoys are very, very good. And so the Iranians are prepared for war. And next time round, we've discussed this before. And what General Rezai said is nothing new to you because, uh, or to me, we know that, and we've been saying that next time round, Iran will move much more swiftly up the escalation ladder. And so will its regional allies, especially Yemen. Yemen will be playing a much bigger role next time round, and they have prepared themselves. They've been building up their capabilities and using this period of quiet to expand their missile and drone capabilities, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So I think the Americans know that. I don't know what goes on in the mind of Trump, obviously, but he is more cautious both in his tone and in the way in which his military acts on the ground. Uh, in these last two cases, for example, the Iranians hit back very hard, and the Americans didn't respond. Last night, Iran's response was more uh, painful than the American strike on Iran, and the Iranians again succeeded in preventing any ships from leaving the strait without permission. So, but yet we didn't see any U.S. response. So I think for now, at least, Trump doesn't want to escalate militarily. But is that going to remain the case? Who knows? We have the situation in Lebanon. We have Netanyahu. We have uh, we have today's attack and the murder of a senior military officer in Lebanon by the Israeli regime. Ironically, right after the Lebanese president, who was installed by the Americans, spoke out against Iran and the resistance, and he clearly has always hated. I mean, one of the this is. I'm sorry, I'm sort of digressing, but the Lebanese president and prime minister have been preventing refugees from moving to different parts of the country. They've sort of trapped them, and the Western NGOs and Western embassies are encouraging them not to allow the supporters of the resistance to seek refuge in different cities and different parts of the countries that are controlled by factions and groups that are not sympathetic to the resistance for the most part. And the Saudis and the regimes in the Persian Gulf are doing the same with their proxies. And they're also telling them, not to let these refugees, which are predominantly Shia, from leaving areas that are predominantly Shia. So the Saudis, the Qataris, the regimes in the Persian Gulf, the Western NGOs, and Western embassies are all cooperating with the president, the prime minister, all of them to create this wall to prevent people from moving around in their own country. It's like mm, I can't think of any other country that would ever have done such a thing to its own people. And then they're preventing Iran and Iraq from sending aid, not military support, any aid. They're preventing ordinary people who are gathering money in Tehran from sending that aid to Lebanon because they want the morale of the supporters of the resistance to crumble. They want them to go hungry, to be humiliated. So the president of Lebanon is a truly sinister person. So is the prime minister. He's a proxy of the United States. And so they went and against the Constitution, they went and had carried out with negotiations with the Israelis, and of course they rejected Iran's position on to force the Israelis to accept the ceasefire and to retreat, basically encouraging uh, the Israelis to violate the ceasefire. And then they carried out these direct talks and gave this huge concession. The talks themselves are a huge concession to the Israeli regime at a time when the rest of the world is turning against the regime, and they got nothing in return. And so they signed an agreement with the regime the other day, and then the president speaks out against Iran. And what does the Israeli regime do? They went and murdered a very senior military officer and two of his companions as he was going to one of those areas that was discussed for the ceasefire between the government and the Israeli regime. So the president effectively humiliated himself. He he gave everything to the Israeli regime, got nothing in return, insulted the people who support the resistance, who are the majority. I mean, this in the last parliamentary elections, his supporters got like 1/3 of the votes of the alliance that supports the resistance. But in any case, we are where we are. And the point is that Netanyahu, Trump may not want to expand the uh, the war, restart the hot war, but we have to see what developments take place in Lebanon. We have to see where Netanyahu pushes this and what forces are at play with regards to is the internal politics of the Israeli regime. Because I personally think that the Axios, and I said this last time, that the Axios revelation of Trump's phone conversation with Netanyahu, I think even though there's no doubt that there's no divide between Washington and the regime in Tel Aviv, but I do think that there are people within the elites in the United States, the powerful elites, the Zionist elites, who probably want Netanyahu to go because this was a humiliating revelation for
I, I
Netanyahu.
I don't know if you saw the agreement between the Lebanese government and Israelis. It's just laughable looking at the terms that they have agreed on. It's about Hezbollah not attacking Israel south to the Litani River and declaring Hezbollah as the enemy of the state in Lebanon. What is that? And how can you?
Yeah, well, the president of Lebanon and the prime minister, they care much less about Lebanon than Iran does. That's just a fact. And they care infinitely less than the resistance and its supporters in Lebanon. And they're collaborators. They were installed by foreign powers. We remember how they were installed, both the president and the prime minister. They have no real political base in the country. They do not command the majority of the people, the popular support. They showed that in the elections. But you have just like elsewhere in this region, you have a collaboration between NATO and regional proxies under for the sake of Israeli interests. It's quite clear. We saw the same in Syria, and we saw the same in Yemen. It's just how it is. That's the empire. Uh, uses its proxies, its regional proxies, just as they use them against Iran. They're using the same proxies against Lebanon. They use the same proxies against Syria. They use the same proxies against Yemen. Remember, during the American war on Yemen, bases in the Persian Gulf were being used to help to bomb Yemen and to coordinate operations against Yemen. The Persian Gulf regimes were all a part of it. They were there; those bases were used, and when the Israelis were attacking Iran with American full support, and without the Americans, the Israelis couldn't have even lasted 12 days. But the bases in the Persian Gulf against were being used. So for anyone to think that these regimes would do anything different in Lebanon, it's they you know they would be very naive.
Yeah. We had Michel Owen saying that Iran is using Hezbollah as a bargaining chip. And looking at the relationship between Iran and Hezbollah, I talk with many of our experts on this podcast, but
I mean,
you,
let me just add one thing. Uh, it's actually the exact opposite. The Americans are more than willing to end the war. They were willing to have the ceasefire if Iran would just give up Lebanon and just say, you know, and Iran is saying no, we will not accept an agreement without Lebanon included. So Michel Aoun or anyone else who says this sort of thing knows that they are being dishonest, but they are under a lot of pressure from the United States, just like Turkey is, just like Qatar is, just like the Emirates are. You know, when the Americans do their arm twisting, these countries obey, and these officials in Lebanon obey. They get threatened uh, by the Americans to be put on a sanctions list. That would mean that they would lose access to their assets. They would lose access to their bank account. They cannot travel to other countries, and not all people are willing to make that sort of sacrifice. So people who one day, take one stance would the next day take a different stance in order to justify that stance. They'll have to say things that they know are not true.